The sound of tearing paper echoed louder than the jet engines outside. It wasn't just a boarding pass. It was an act of war. Beatrice, the senior flight attendant, sneered as the pieces of the first-class ticket fluttered to the dirty terminal floor. She looked at the young girl in the oversized hoodie and whispered, "We don't allow fraud on my plane. Go back to economy, or go to jail." She thought she was disciplining a scammer. She didn't know she had just declared war on the daughter of the man who signed her paychecks. This is the story of how one act of prejudice brought down an entire career. The air inside JFK's Terminal 4 was thick with the scent of stale pretzels and the palpable anxiety of holiday travel. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, rain lashed against the fuselage of the massive Boeing 707, sitting at gate B-42, emblazoned with the navy and gold livery of Vanguard Airways. Beatrice van der Waal stood at the precipice of the jet bridge, her posture rigid, her uniform pressed to a razor's edge. Beatrice was 54, tired, and currently fueled by a dangerous cocktail of caffeine and resentment. She had been flying with Vanguard for 25 years. She had survived the merger with Continental, the budget cuts of 2008, and the pension freeze of 2015. She wore her seniority like a loaded weapon. Today, her patience was non-existent. The flight to London Heathrow was overbooked. The catering crew was late loading the vegan meals, and her feet were already throbbing in her regulation heels. She scanned the line of passengers with the eyes of a hawk looking for a field mouse. She hated the upgrades, the people who used miles or credit card points to sneak into the world of luxury she believed belonged to the truly elite and the crew who served them. Then she saw her. Maya Anderson was standing in the priority lane. Maya was 22, though she looked younger with her hair pulled back in messy braids and a face free of makeup. She wore a faded grey university hoodie, black leggings and battered Converse sneakers. A backpack hung off one shoulder and she was scrolling through a playlist on her phone, looking entirely unbothered. Beatrice's lip curled. To her, Maya represented everything wrong with modern travel, sloppy, disrespectful, and clearly out of place. "Excuse me," Beatrice barked, stepping away from the podium, where the gate agent, a nervous young man named Timothy, was processing tickets. Maya looked up, sliding her headphones down to her neck. "Yes." Her voice was soft, polite. "This is the priority lane." Beatrice said, her voice projecting loud enough for the business-class passengers behind Maya to hear. "Group 1 only. Economy boarding is in 30 minutes. You need to step aside." Maya blinked, confused. She reached into her back pocket. "Oh, I know. I'm in Group 1, Seat 2A. Beatrice scoffed a short, sharp sound that silenced the nearby conversation. "Seat 2A is a first-class suite, miss. It costs $12,000 one way. I highly doubt you're in 2A. "I have my boarding pass right here," Maya said, extending a printed ticket toward the scanner. Beatrice snatched the paper from Maya's hand before it could reach the red laser. She held it up to the light, squinting at it theatrically. "Anderson." She read the name, then looked back at Maya with a look of withering scrutiny. "And how exactly did you acquire this Ms. Anderson? Did you find it on the floor? Or perhaps you're trying to use a screenshot of someone else's ticket?" "I printed it at the kiosk." Maya said, her brow furrowing. "Is there a problem? The flight leaves in 40 minutes. "The problem?" Beatrice said, stepping closer. "Invading Maya's personal space is that I have a zero-tolerance policy for scammers. I see girls like you all the time. You think because you have a smartphone, you can hack the system or print a fake pass to get a glass of champagne before we kick you back to row 45. The line behind them was growing restless. A man in a bespoke suit checked his Rolex ostentatiously. "Is there an issue here? We'd like to board." "Just a moment, sir." Beatrice smiled sweetly at the man, then turned her icy gaze back to Maya. "I'm handling a security breach." "It's not a security breach," Maya said, her voice trembling slightly but remaining firm. "Check the computer. My name is on the manifest. Maya Anderson." Beatrice didn't look at the computer. She didn't look at Timothy, the gate agent, who was frantically typing on his keyboard, looking pale. "I don't need to check the computer to know when I'm being lied to," Beatrice hissed. She looked at the heavy card stock in her hands, the ticket that represented a seat worth more than her car. Then, holding Maya's gaze, Beatrice did the unthinkable. Rip! The sound was sharp and final. Beatrice tore the boarding pass down the middle. She put the two halves together and tore them again. She let the confetti-like pieces flutter down onto Maya's battered Converse sneakers. The gate went silent. Even the man in the bespoke suit stopped checking his watch. "There," Beatrice said, dusting her hands off. "Now you have no ticket, which means you are trespassing in a secure area. Get out of my line, or I will have the Port Authority arrest you for fraud." Maya stood frozen. She looked down at the shredded paper, then back up at Beatrice. There was no anger in Maya's eyes, which unnerved Beatrice slightly. Instead, there was a deep, terrifying calm. "You really shouldn't have done that," Maya said quietly. "Are you threatening me?" Beatrice's voice pitched up an octave, seizing the opportunity to play the victim. She turned to the crowd. "Did you hear that? She just threatened a crew member." Timothy, the gate agent, finally found his voice. "Beatrice," he whispered urgently, leaning over the counter. "Beatrice, wait. I'm looking at the manifest. It says here, 'Quiet Timothy.'" Beatrice snapped, not even looking at him. "I am the lead flight attendant on this vessel. I decide who is fit to fly, and this individual is exhibiting aggressive behavior." She reached for the corded phone on the wall and punched in a code. "Security to gate B42. I have a disruptive passenger refusing to vacate the boarding area. Potential ticket fraud." Maya didn't move. She didn't scream, and she didn't cry. She simply knelt down, picked up the largest piece of her torn ticket, the part with the QR code still partially visible, and stood back up. "I'm not aggressive," Maya said, her voice level. "I'm a paying customer. You just destroyed my property." "Property implies you own it." Beatrice smirked, crossing her arms. "That ticket is the property of Vanguard Airways, and as a representative of this airline, I have revoked it." Two Port Authority police officers, Officer Miller and Officer Hernandez, jogged down the concourse, their radios squawking. The crowd parted for them. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Miller asked, his hand resting near his belt. He was a large man who looked like he'd rather be eating lunch than dealing with gate drama. "Officer, thank goodness," Beatrice said, instantly shifting her demeanor to that of a distressed professional. "This young woman attempted to board with a fraudulent ticket. When I confronted her, she became hostile. She refused to leave the priority area and then threatened me." Miller turned to Maya. He sized her up, hoodie leggings, messy hair. Then he looked at Beatrice uniform badge's authority. The bias was immediate and subconscious. "Miss," Miller said to Maya, "I need to see your ID and your boarding pass." "I gave her my boarding pass," Maya said, pointing at Beatrice. She ripped it up and threw it on the floor. Miller looked at the scraps of paper on the carpet. He looked back at Beatrice. "It was a fake officer," Beatrice lied effortlessly. "I confiscated it to prevent her from trying to use it again." She snatched it back and tore it herself in a fit of rage. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. It was a brazen lie, but Beatrice delivered it with such conviction that heads began to nod. "That's not true," a woman from the back of the line shouted. "She ripped it." Beatrice glared at the witness. "Please do not interfere with a federal investigation, ma'am, unless you want to be offloaded as well." The witness fell silent, intimidated. Officer Miller sighed. "Miss," he said to Maya, "you need to step out of the line. You're causing a disturbance." "I just want to get on my flight," Maya said. "My father is expecting me in London for dinner." Beatrice laughed, a cruel, harsh sound. "Oh, her father. Did you hear that Daddy is expecting her? Let me guess. Does Daddy own a dealership, or maybe a chain of laundromats?" Maya looked Beatrice dead in the eye. "Something like that." Maya pulled out her phone. "I'm going to make a call." "Put the phone away," Officer Hernandez said, stepping forward. "You need to come with us to the desk so we can sort this out." "I'm allowed to make a phone call," Maya stated firmly. She tapped a contact labeled simply as Dad Personal. Beatrice rolled her eyes. Let her call. Let her call the Tooth Fairy for all I care. She's not getting on Flight 189. Maya put the phone to her ear. The line rang twice. "Maya," a deep, gravelly voice answered. "You boarding. You're cutting it close, kiddo." "Hey, Dad," Maya said, her voice cracking just a fraction. "I'm at the gate. There's a problem. The head flight attendant, she ripped up my ticket. She told the police I'm a fraud and that I threatened her." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure in the terminal dropped. "She did what?" The voice on the phone was no longer warm. It was cold steel. "She said I don't look like I belong in first class. The police are here. They're trying to escort me away." "Put me on speaker," the voice commanded. "Right now." Maya pulled the phone away from her ear and pressed the speaker button. She held it out toward Beatrice and Officer Miller. "My father wants to speak to you," Maya said. Beatrice stepped forward, a mockery of a smile on her face. She leaned toward the phone. "Listen here, sir. I don't know who you think you are, but your daughter is disrupting a federal flight. If you raised her to have some manners, we wouldn't be in this situation. She is not boarding. Period." "Who is this?" The voice on the phone boomed. It wasn't a shout. It was the kind of authoritative projection used by men who commanded rooms of thousands. "This is Beatrice Vanderwall, Senior Purser," she snapped. "And I have the authority to deny boarding to anyone. Now goodbye." Beatrice reached out and aggressively tapped the red End Call button on Maya's screen. The line went dead. Maya stared at the phone. Then she looked at Beatrice. "You really just hung up on him." "I have a schedule to keep," Beatrice said, turning her back on Maya. "Officers, remove her. Timothy, start boarding Group 1. Timothy was shaking. He was staring at his screen where he had finally pulled up Maya's full passenger profile. There, next to her name, was a small, flashing code, VIP 001. Board member. Family. Do not downgrade. "Beatrice," Timothy squeaked. "Beatrice, you need to look at this." "Not now, Timothy," Beatrice yelled. Officer Miller grabbed Maya's elbow. "Come on, miss. Let's go. Don't make this hard." Maya didn't resist. She allowed herself to be guided out of the priority lane, past the smirking Beatrice, and over to the sterile grey chairs of the waiting area. She sat down, watching as the wealthy passengers, the ones who looked the part, began to hand their tickets to Timothy and walk down the jet bridge. As Beatrice swiped her badge to open the jet bridge door, she looked back at Maya one last time. "Maybe next time," Beatrice sneered. "Try taking the bus." Maya just sat there, clutching her phone. It buzzed, a text message from her father. "Stay put. Do not leave the gate. I'm making a call to the tower and the station manager. Give me 5 minutes." Maya looked up at the clock. The flight was scheduled to push back in 20 minutes. Beatrice disappeared down the tunnel, feeling victorious, completely unaware that she had just sealed her own fate. The heavy reinforced door of the Boeing 777 thudded shut, sealing the outside world away. For Beatrice, that sound was better than applause. It was the sound of order being restored. She adjusted the silk scarf around her neck and smoothed the front of her blazer. The cabin was bathed in the soft, ambient mood lighting that Vanguard Airways used to simulate a calming sunset, a stark contrast to the grey, wet misery of New York outside. The air smelled of expensive leather, sanitized air, and the crisp citrus notes of the pre-flight champagne she was already uncorking. Beatrice moved through the first-class cabin with the grace of a dancer and the arrogance of a queen. This was her domain. Here she wasn't just a service worker. She was the gatekeeper of luxury. "More champagne, Mr. Sterling," she cooed, leaning over the man in the bespoke suit, the same man who had checked his Rolex impatiently at the gate. "Please, Beatrice," Mr. Sterling smiled, holding out his crystal flute. "And thank you for handling that situation earlier. It's getting harder and harder to fly these days without being accosted by the riffraff." Beatrice poured the golden liquid with practiced, steady hands, watching the bubbles rise. "It is my pleasure, Mr. Sterling. Vanguard prides itself on exclusivity. Some people think that just because they scrape together enough points for a ticket, they belong in this cabin. But we know better, don't we?" She gave him a conspiratorial wink. It was an intoxicating feeling for her bonding with the wealthy, pretending that for these 8 hours she was one of them united against the commoners of the world. She walked back to the galley, humming to herself. Her junior flight attendant, a sweet but timid girl named Sarah, was organizing the meal carts. "That was intense at the gate," Sarah ventured quietly, not making eye contact. "The girl, she seemed really calm. Are you sure the ticket was fake?" Beatrice whipped around, her eyes flashing. "Don't start with me, Sarah. You've been flying for 6 months. I have been spotting grifters since before you were born. The girl was a mess. Hoodies in first class, absolutely not. Not on my watch. But looking at the manifest..." Sarah hesitated, holding up the tablet. "Seat 2A is still showing as occupied. The system hasn't cleared her." "The system is slow," Beatrice snapped, snatching the tablet from Sarah's hands and tossing it onto the metal counter. "Forget about seat 2A. It's empty. That means extra meals for the crew. Now go check on the pilots. We need to push back on time. I want to get to London and put this day behind me." Meanwhile, inside the terminal, the atmosphere was shifting from chaotic to suffocating. Timothy, the gate agent, was no longer standing. He had collapsed into his swivel chair, staring at his monitor with the blood drained from his face. He had finally clicked the hyperlinked profile of Anderson Maya. It wasn't just a VIP tag. It was a dossier. Passenger Anderson. Maya status. Global services. Premier. Relation. Daughter of CEO Richard Anderson, notes. Direct board access. Do not deny boarding under any circumstances. Timothy felt bile rise in his throat. He looked out the window. The jet bridge had been retracted. The tug truck was already attached to the nose gear of the massive plane. "Oh, God," Timothy whispered. He grabbed the landline phone to call the flight deck. It rang and rang. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reynolds and First Officer Lewis were running through the before start checklist. The cockpit was a symphony of beeps and hums. "APU is running," Lewis said. "Packs are on." The interphone buzzed. Captain Reynolds frowned. "Ignore that. We're 2 minutes behind schedule. Beatrice probably wants to know the flight time again." They ignored the call. Back in the terminal waiting area, Maya sat perfectly still. Officer Miller and Officer Hernandez stood over her, their posture slightly less aggressive than before, but still guarding her like a criminal. "Look, miss," Officer Miller said, looking at his notebook. "If you just give us your real ID, we can process the trespassing charge and let you go with a citation. There's no need to drag this out." Maya didn't look at him. She was watching the plane through the glass. She saw the red beacon light on the bottom of the fuselage start to flash. The plane was waking up. "I'm not giving you my ID because I haven't committed a crime," Maya said softly. "And I advise you to wait exactly." She glanced at her phone. "1 more minute before you file any paperwork." "Listen, lady." Hernandez stepped in his patience, wearing thin. "You're not calling the shots here. Hernandez's radio squawked, cutting him off. The static was loud in the quiet gate area. "Central to Units 4 Alpha and 4 Bravo at Gate B42. Miller grabbed his shoulder mic. "Go ahead, Central. Hold position. Do not, I repeat, do not process the suspect. We have a code 1099 incoming from airport operations. The station manager is en route to your location. ETA, 30 seconds. Miller and Hernandez exchanged a confused look. A code 1099 wasn't a police code they used often. It meant high-level diplomatic or corporate intervention. "What did you do?" Miller asked Maya, his voice dropping to a whisper. Maya finally looked up at him, her brown eyes cold and hard as flint. "I told you. I called my dad." The rain had picked up, hammering against the glass walls of Terminal 4, blurring the lights of the runway into smears of red and yellow. Down the long corridor of the concourse, the sound of running footsteps broke the low murmur of the travelers. It wasn't the jog of a late passenger. It was the frantic, desperate sprint of a man who knew his career hung in the balance. Arthur Henderson, the Vanguard Airways station manager for JFK, was a man who prided himself on composure. He wore three-piece suits, kept his silver hair immaculately parted, and never raised his voice. But right now Arthur Henderson was sweating through his Egyptian cotton shirt. He had just received a phone call from Richard Anderson directly. The call had lasted 20 seconds. It was the most terrifying 20 seconds of Arthur's life. He rounded the corner to Gate B42, his chest heaving. He saw the scene immediately. The 2 police officers looming over a young woman in a grey hoodie. The empty gate desk where Timothy was burying his face in his hands. And outside the Boeing 707, beginning to move. "Stop!" Arthur screamed, though the plane couldn't hear him. He didn't run to the police. He didn't run to Timothy. He ran straight to the window, watching the pushback tug slowly reversing the aircraft. He spun around, his face purple. "Timothy, why is that plane moving?" Timothy looked up, tears in his eyes. "Beatrice. She closed the door. She wouldn't listen. I tried to call." Arthur slammed his hand onto the desk, grabbing the direct line to the tower. He didn't dial the gate phone. He dialed the emergency dispatch for ground control. "This is Vanguard Station Manager Henderson," he barked into the receiver. "Emergency stop on Flight 189 at Gate B42. Do not let that plane taxi. I repeat, stop that aircraft immediately. We have an unauthorized departure." He slammed the phone down and turned to the police officers. Officer Miller stepped forward. "Sir, we have the suspect in custody. She refused to—" "Shut up!" Arthur Henderson roared. The violence of the outburst made Officer Miller take a step back. You have who in custody? Arthur walked over to Maya. He didn't look at her clothes. He didn't look at her hair. He looked at the face that he had seen in the company newsletter every Christmas since she was a child. He saw the eyes of the man who owned the building they were standing in. Arthur dropped to one knee. Literally. On the dirty airport carpet, he knelt before the girl in the Converse sneakers. Ms. Anderson, Arthur wheezed, trying to catch his breath. I am devastatingly sorry. I just got off the phone with your father. There has been a terrible, terrible mistake. The entire gate area went silent. The other passengers waiting for different flights stopped eating their sandwiches. The police officers froze. Officer Miller's hand slowly moved away from his belt. Maya looked at Arthur. She didn't smile. She didn't look relieved. She looked exhausted. Mr. Henderson, is it? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Arthur Henderson. My father said you would fix this, but that plane is moving. Arthur stood up, his face grim. Not for long. Inside Flight 189, the safety video was playing on the personal screens. Beatrice was walking through the cabin doing her final compliance checks, ensuring seatbelts were fastened and tray tables were stowed. The plane lurched slightly as the tug pushed it back from the gate. Beatrice smiled. On time, she thought. Perfect. Suddenly the plane stopped. It wasn't the gentle stop of the pushback completing. It was a hard, jarring brake. The china in the galley rattled. A few passengers gasped. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Reynolds's voice came over the PA system. He sounded confused, perhaps even a little annoyed. Sorry for that sudden stop. We've just received an urgent command from ground control to hold our position. Not sure what the issue is, probably traffic on the alleyway. We'll get you moving in a jiffy. Beatrice rolled her eyes. ATC delays, she thought. Classic JFK. She walked to the interphone and called the cockpit. Captain, it's Beatrice. How long are we looking at? Should I break out the water service? I don't know, Beatrice. Reynolds replied, his voice tight. Tower says we have to. Return to the gate. Mandatory order. They aren't giving me a reason. Return to gate? Beatrice huffed. For what? Did we miss a bag? They said it's a security issue involving crew, Reynolds said. Prepare the L1 door for reopening. We're being towed back in. Beatrice slammed the handset back into its cradle. Unbelievable, she muttered to Sarah. Someone probably left their badge in the terminal. Incompetence everywhere. The plane groaned as the tug switched directions, pulling the massive beast back toward the building it had just left. Beatrice put on her professional smile, plastered on and fake, and addressed the first-class cabin. My apologies, everyone. A minor technicality. We have to pop back to the gate for just a moment. Please remain seated. She stood by the L1 door, tapping her foot impatiently. She was already mentally drafting the complaint email she would send to management about this delay. The plane shuddered to a halt. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged. Beatrice waited for the knock from the outside agent. When it came, she disarmed the door, rotated the heavy handle and pushed it open. She expected to see Timothy looking apologetic. Instead, she saw Arthur Henderson, the station manager. His face was pale, his jaw set in a line of fury. Behind him stood 2 Port Authority police officers, the same ones she had called. And standing between them, looking small but casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the entire jet bridge, was the girl in the grey hoodie. Beatrice blinked. What is this? Why is she back? Arthur Henderson didn't step onto the plane. He stood on the metal platform of the jet bridge, blocking the exit. "Miss van der Waal," Arthur said, his voice carrying into the silent cabin behind her. "Grab your bag." Beatrice laughed nervously. "Excuse me, Arthur, what is going on?" "This passenger was denied boarding for fraud." "Grab your bag," Arthur repeated, enunciating every word with lethal precision. "You are relieved of duty, effective immediately." "You can't do that," Beatrice sputtered, her face flushing red. "I am the senior purser. You can't offload me for her." "She's a scammer, Beatrice," Arthur said, and this time he stepped forward, bringing Maya with him. "I would like to introduce you to Maya Anderson, the daughter of Richard Anderson, the CEO and majority shareholder of Vanguard Airways." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound that the hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power sounded like a roar. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees went weak. She looked at the girl, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw the resemblance. The eyes, the jawline. It was undeniable. "But," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. She was wearing a hoodie. Maya stepped forward. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She spoke calmly so everyone in the first few rows could hear. "I didn't know there was a dress code for buying a ticket," Maya said. "But I do know there's a code of conduct for employees, and you just broke every single line of it." Beatrice looked back at the cabin. Mr. Sterling, the man she had been serving champagne to, was staring at her with open mouth. The entire first-class cabin was watching the implosion of her life. "Captain Reynolds," Beatrice shrieked, turning toward the cockpit. "Captain, they are removing me. You have to stop them." Captain Reynolds emerged from the cockpit. He looked at Arthur Henderson. He looked at Maya. Then he looked at Beatrice with an expression of cold detachment. "You heard the station manager, Beatrice," the captain said. "Get off my plane." Beatrice stood paralyzed. Her world, built on 25 years of seniority and a false sense of superiority, was crumbling in seconds. "Officer," Arthur nodded to the police. "Please escort Miss van der Waal off the aircraft. She is trespassing." As Officer Miller reached out to take Beatrice's arm, the same arm that had aggressively pointed at Maya just an hour ago, Beatrice let out a sob. It wasn't a sob of remorse. It was the sob of someone who realized they had just lost everything. "This isn't fair," Beatrice cried as she was led onto the jet bridge. "I was just doing my job." Maya watched her go. Then she turned to Arthur Henderson. "I need to board now," Maya said. "I'm late for dinner." "Of course, Miss Anderson," Arthur said, bowing his head. "Please. Seat 2A is ready." Maya stepped onto the plane. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Beatrice wasn't just going to lose her job. She was about to become the catalyst for a purge that would shake the entire airline. And the passengers in first class were about to learn that silence in the face of injustice had a price, too. The walk from the aircraft door to seat 2A was less than 20 feet. But for Maya and for the 12 other passengers in first class, it felt like a mile-long march across a minefield. Maya stepped into the cabin. The air was different now. Before, it had been filled with the low murmur of self-important conversations, the rustling of newspapers and the clinking of pre-flight beverages. Now it was a vacuum. The silence was absolute, heavy and suffocating. She moved slowly. She didn't strut. She didn't glare. She simply walked with the exhaustion of someone who had just fought a war she never asked for. She adjusted her backpack strap, the same faded grey canvas that Beatrice had sneered at, and stopped at the second row. To her right, in seat 2B, sat Mr. Sterling, the man in the bespoke navy suit, the man who had checked his Rolex while Beatrice shredded her ticket, the man who had laughed when Beatrice made the joke about Maya's father owning a laundromat. Mr. Sterling was currently finding the pattern on the carpet incredibly fascinating. He refused to look up. His hands, manicured and adorned with a platinum wedding band, were gripping the armrests so tightly his knuckles were white. Maya placed her bag in the overhead bin. She didn't slam it. She closed it with a soft click. Then she sat down. The leather was cool and soft. The seat was wide, a throne designed for captains of industry. Sarah, the junior flight attendant, who had been terrified in the galley, appeared at Maya's elbow instantly. Sarah was trembling. She held a silver tray with a glass of champagne and a warm towel. "Miss Anderson." Sarah's voice was a whisper, shaking. I brought you the vintage Dom Perignon and a warm towel. Is there anything else I can get you? A pillow? A different meal?" Maya looked at Sarah. She saw a young woman who was likely paying off student loans, terrified of losing her livelihood because of her supervisor's prejudice. "Thank you, Sarah," Maya said gently. She took the towel but waved away the champagne. "Just water, please, sparkling if you have it." "Of course, immediately." Sarah practically ran to the galley. As Sarah left, Mr. Sterling finally worked up the courage to speak. He cleared his throat, a wet, nervous sound. He turned his head slightly, putting on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a man trying to negotiate a settlement after being caught embezzling. "Ms. Anderson," Sterling said, his voice oily. I wanted to say that was truly unfortunate. What happened back there? That woman, Beatrice. She was clearly unstable. I had a feeling something was off about her." Maya turned her head slowly. She looked at Mr. Sterling. She looked at his expensive suit, his silk tie, his polished shoes. "You had a feeling?" Maya asked, her voice low enough that he had to lean in to hear. "Yes, absolutely." Sterling nodded vigorously. "I mean the way she spoke to you. It was unacceptable. If I had known who you were—" He stopped. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Maya smiled, but it was a smile that could cut glass. "If you had known who I was." She repeated the words slowly. "That's the problem, isn't it, Mr. Sterling? If I were a random student or just a girl saving up for a special trip, you would have been fine with it. You were fine with it. You checked your watch." "Now wait a minute," Sterling stammered, his face reddening. "I was just eager to board. I have a meeting in London." "We all have places to be," Maya interrupted, turning her body fully toward him. "You watched a woman destroy my property and humiliate me. You laughed when she insulted my father. You didn't speak up because you thought I didn't matter. You thought I was trash because I'm wearing a hoodie and you're wearing a suit." Sterling opened his mouth, but no words came out. "My father," Maya continued, her voice gaining a steely edge, "is Richard Anderson. He built this airline on the principle that travel opens the mind. But clearly for some people, it just inflates the ego. Enjoy your flight, Mr. Sterling. I have a feeling it's going to be a very long 7 hours for you." She pressed the button to raise the privacy divider between their seats. The mechanical whir of the partition rising was the final gavel strike. Mr. Sterling was left staring at a grey wall alone with his shame. The plane finally pushed back, resuming the journey that had almost been aborted. As the engines roared to life and the aircraft taxied to the runway, the captain came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We are cleared for departure. We apologize for the delay and the Personnel change at the gate. We will be making up time in the air." His voice sounded strained. He knew that the passenger in 2A was not just a VIP. She was a witness, and the cockpit voice recorder was rolling. As the plane lifted off, climbing through the grey rain into the bright sunlight above the clouds, Maya didn't look out of the window. She pulled out her phone, connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, and opened her email. She had a message from her father. Subject: landing. Message: I'm in London. I flew the Gulf Stream. I'll meet you at the gate. We have a meeting with the UK regional team, and I've already called HR in New York. Rest. I'll handle the welcome party. Maya put her phone down and closed her eyes. She wasn't happy. She wasn't triumphant. She was tired. She realized that money could buy a first-class ticket, and it could even buy an airline, but it couldn't buy basic human decency. That apparently was still in short supply. The flight across the Atlantic was smooth, but the atmosphere inside the first-class cabin was brittle. No one asked for refills. No one pressed the call button. The passengers ate their meals in silence, avoiding eye contact with seat 2A. They were terrified that any wrong move, any slightly too loud chew or misplaced elbow would result in them being banned from the airline for life. When the landing gear deployed with a heavy thud over London Heathrow, the tension ratcheted up again. The plane taxied to Terminal 2, the Queen's Terminal. Usually when the seatbelt sign turned off, there was a mad scramble of passengers standing up to grab their bags. Not today. When the chime dinged, Maya remained seated. And because she remained seated, everyone else remained seated. It was an unspoken acknowledgement of hierarchy. The riffraff in the hoodie was now the captain of the ship. The L1 door opened, but instead of the usual rush of cool English air and the sound of ground staff, 3 men in dark suits walked onto the plane. They weren't flight attendants. They weren't cleaners. They were corporate security. Behind them walked a man who dominated the space. He was 6'3" black with salt and pepper hair and a beard that was perfectly groomed. He wore a charcoal wool coat over a turtleneck. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a monarch. It was Richard Anderson. The captain who had emerged from the cockpit to say goodbye to the passengers froze. He extended a hand nervously. "Mr. Anderson, sir. I didn't know you were in London. We had a smooth flight." Richard Anderson looked at the captain's hand, then looked at the captain's face. He did not shake the hand. "Captain Reynolds," Richard said, his voice a deep rumble that carried through the silent cabin. "You've been with us for 12 years. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. 13 in May. 13 years." Richard nodded slowly. "And in 13 years you never learned that the captain is responsible for the safety and dignity of every passenger. You let a purser abuse a young woman on your jet bridge, and you only intervened when the station manager stopped the plane." "Sir, I was in the cockpit. I didn't see—" Reynolds stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "You are the captain," Richard cut him off. "Ignorance is not a defense. It is a failure of command. We will discuss your future at the debriefing. It is mandatory. Do not go to your hotel." Reynolds went pale and stepped back, flattening himself against the cockpit door. Richard walked past him into the first-class cabin. He stopped at row 2. Maya stood up. She looked small next to him, but her posture was identical. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. Richard's face softened instantly. The corporate titan vanished, replaced by a father. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tight, shielding her from the gaze of the room. "I'm sorry, baby girl," he whispered. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." "I'm okay," she muffled into his coat. "I just want to go home." "We're going," he said. He pulled back and looked at her, checking her face for tears. Finding none, he nodded with pride. "Let's go." He took her backpack from the overhead bin, an act of service that shocked the onlookers, the CEO carrying a battered canvas bag. As they turned to leave, Richard paused. He looked at the cabin. He looked at the faces of the 12 people sitting there. He looked specifically at Mr. Sterling in 2B, who was currently trying to shrink into a molecular state. Richard didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply spoke to the room. "I built Vanguard Airways to connect people," Richard said calmly. "We hold our employees to the highest standard. But looking around this cabin, I see that we have work to do on our culture. And culture isn't just about who we hire. It's about who we fly." He locked eyes with Sterling. "Silence is complicity," Richard said. "When you see injustice and you say nothing because it doesn't affect you or because the victim doesn't look like you, you are part of the problem. I hope the champagne was worth it." He put a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Come on." They walked off the plane. The 3 security guards followed. As soon as they were on the jet bridge, the facade of the calm CEO cracked slightly. Richard pulled out his phone. "Arthur." He spoke into the device, addressing the NY station manager. "I have Maya. We are clear. I want a full audit of Beatrice Vanderwall's employment history on my desk by morning. Every complaint, every write-up, every misunderstanding she's ever had. And Arthur." He paused, walking past the bowing Heathrow ground staff. "Find out who the other gate agents were, the ones who watched. I want them interviewed. If they confirm they were intimidated by her, they get retraining. If they confirm they laughed along with her, fire them. Cause." He hung up. They walked through the private VIP immigration channel, a quiet corridor of frosted glass and marble floors. "You didn't have to come," Maya said, adjusting her pace to match his. "I could have handled it." "I know you could," Richard said. "You handled it better than I would have. I would have torn the terminal down, brick by brick." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "But Maya, this isn't just about you. If she did this to you, my daughter, a global services member, imagine what she's been doing to people who don't have a direct line to the CEO. Imagine the grandmothers she's harassed, the students she's embarrassed, the people she's kicked off because she didn't like their tone." Maya stopped walking. She thought about the way Beatrice had looked at her. It wasn't just annoyance. It was contempt. It was a deep-seated belief that Maya could not possibly be equal to her. "She called me a fraud," Maya said softly. "She didn't even check the computer. She just saw me and decided I was a criminal." "That's why I'm here," Richard said. "We aren't just firing her, Maya. We're going to make an example of her. And we're going to change the policy. No more discretionary denials without a supervisor present. We're going to fix the system." They reached the curb where a black Range Rover was waiting. The driver opened the door. "But first," Richard said, gesturing for her to get in, "we have one stop to make before the hotel." "Where?" Maya asked, climbing into the plush leather interior. "The Vanguard Regional Office," Richard said, his jaw tightening. "The video of the incident at JFK. Someone recorded it. A passenger in the terminal. It's already on Twitter. It has 3 million views." Maya's eyes widened. "Oh no." "Oh yes," Richard grimaced. "The world is watching, Maya. Beatrice made you famous. Now we have to control the narrative before the stock market opens in New York." The car pulled away from the curb, sliding into the rainy London traffic. Maya looked out the window. She had just wanted to get to London for a quiet dinner. Instead, she had become the face of a movement. And Beatrice Vanderwall, sitting in a security office back at JFK, stripped of her badge, and her dignity, was about to realize that going viral was the worst thing that could have ever happened to her. 3 days later, the storm had not passed. It had evolved into a hurricane. The video of Beatrice Vanderwall screaming at Maya Anderson had been viewed 40 million times. It was on CNN, the BBC, and the front page of Reddit. The hashtag Vanguard Voices was trending not with complaints, but with thousands of stories from other passengers sharing similar experiences of discrimination. Beatrice sat in her Queen's apartment, the curtains drawn tight against the daylight. She wore a stained bathrobe, a stark contrast to the pristine navy uniform that now hung in plastic at the back of her closet, a uniform she would never wear again. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. It wasn't friends offering support. It was reporters. It was angry internet trolls. It was her landlord asking about the noise. She had received her termination letter via courier that morning. It was brutal in its brevity, gross misconduct, violation of civil rights, immediate termination with cause. With cause meant no severance, no golden parachute, and because the incident involved potential violation of federal aviation access laws, her flight attendant certification was under review by the FAA. She wasn't just fired from Vanguard. She was effectively blacklisted from the sky. 25 years of seniority gone in the time it took to rip a piece of paper. On her television, a press conference was starting. Richard Anderson stood at a podium in the Vanguard headquarters lobby. Next to him stood Maya. She looked different, stronger. She wasn't hiding in a hoodie today. She was wearing a sharp blazer, looking every bit the heiress and future leader she was. "We cannot change the past," Richard spoke into the microphones, his voice grave. "But we can change the future. The behavior exhibited by our former employee was a symptom of a systemic failure to value human dignity over status." Maya stepped forward to the microphone. Beatrice watched, mesmerized by the girl she had called a fraud. "I didn't want to be a story," Maya said, her voice clear and steady. "I just wanted to see my dad. But if my experience can prevent this from happening to someone who doesn't have a CEO on speed dial, then it was worth it." "Today," Richard announced, "Vanguard is implementing the Open Sky Initiative, mandatory bias training for all 40,000 employees, a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory profiling. And we are establishing an independent oversight committee led by Maya to review all denied boarding complaints." Beatrice turned off the TV. The silence in her apartment was deafening. She had spent her career looking down on people convinced she was the gatekeeper of an exclusive club. Now the club had thrown her out, and the girl she'd tried to shame was rewriting the rules. Beatrice looked at the shredded pieces of her own life, realizing too late that dignity isn't determined by the price of a ticket, but by how you treat the person holding it. Beatrice Vanderwall thought she was protecting the prestige of her airline. In reality, she was exposing the rot within her own character. The story of Maya Anderson isn't just a tale of a wealthy girl getting revenge. It is a stark reminder that we never truly know who we are dealing with. We judge people by their clothes, their age, or the color of their skin, often forgetting that the most powerful people in the room are often the quietest. Maya used her privilege not to destroy Beatrice, but to dismantle the system that allowed people like Beatrice to thrive. Justice was served not just in the firing of one bitter employee, but in the transformation of an entire culture. It costs absolutely nothing to be kind. But as Beatrice learned, it can cost you everything to be cruel. If you believe that respect should be the default, not an upgrade, hit that like button right now. It helps get this message out to more people. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on how you looked? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you want more stories about instant karma and justice served, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind, because you never know who you're talking to.